And so now I have the pleasure of presenting to all of you, and we'll see, hopefully more will join, but in the meantime, I'm very happy to have you all. Please feel free, if you haven't already, introduced yourself in the chat, who you are, where you are, and what your current position is, what you do. And I will get started. So let me start sharing my screen. And I really appreciate those of you who were here for a while and waited as we worked out the technical difficulties. Oops, sorry. I don't think you're seeing the right screen. Okay, let me make sure. Just a second. Get rid of this. Okay. There we go. Okay. So, as I said, I'm Ilene Winokur, and I am in Kuwait. Today's session is all about asset-based or strength-based teaching, changing our perceptions, and by doing that, creating a sense of belonging and achievement for our students. I have said the essence of belonging is feeling safe within ourselves and with others. And we talk about feeling safe, then feeling a sense of belonging, and then learning. And actually, it's not a progression. It really works all together. And perceptions are a big part of that feeling a sense of belonging for us as adults and also for our students. So I was born in the USA, as you can tell from my American accent, and I was born in New York, the New York area, but I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and I have lived in Kuwait, as I said, since 1984. My husband's Kuwaiti. I speak fluent Arabic, Kuwaiti Arabic, of course, although I do understand all of the dialects of Arabic, and have, for those of you who are in Egypt, I have visited Egypt. I've been to Sharm el-Sheikh, I've been to Cairo, and I have been to Alexandria, Scandaria, which I loved very much. The 25 years in education, I'm also an author of a book called Journey to Belonging, Pathways to Wellbeing, and I do blog. And I'm a podcaster of a podcast called Journeys to Belonging, where I introduce teachers, educators, and others about their sense of belonging. And as I was introduced, I'm a PD specialist and a teacher coach, educator coach. Session objectives. So we want to take a look at how perceptions of others and words matter. Ensuring a sense of belonging based on our changing perceptions and being mindful of the words that we use, planting seeds for success as a result of all of that, and then, of course, the most important part to every teacher and every educator is, how do I do it in my classroom? So how do I build my toolbox? And at the end, I will be sharing a Wakelet collection of all kinds of articles and activities that you can use to build up your asset-based teaching. So I wanted to do a quick poll. If in the chat, you could write 1, 2, or 3. 1 is asset or strength-based teaching is a new concept to me. I don't really know anything or haven't ever heard of it. Or I may have heard of it, but I really don't know what it is. 2, I've heard of asset-based teaching, but I'm not sure how to implement it. How do I take it into my classroom? What do I do? What does that mean in terms of my teaching? Or 3, I'm an asset or strength-based teacher. I've been doing it for a while. I know what it is. I have different activities and lessons and things that I do. I'm very mindful of it. So I'd love to see those of you who have experience or not. So if you just put 1, 2, or 3 in the chat, I see Ali's already replied. Thank you, Ali. Anyone else? 1, 2, or 3. You're new to it, don't know anything about it. You're a little bit know about it, but you're not sure how to implement it in your classroom, or you do it all the time and you know quite a lot about it. Anyone else? Just 1, 2, or 3. Okay, I'll wait another 20, 30 seconds for responses. Okay. Well, I'm going to assume that there isn't a lot of knowledge about it, and so I'm going to proceed with the presentation since we're running a little bit late anyway. Let's see, another response. 2, yes. Okay, so it sounds like there are still things you want to know or you're not sure about. So I just want to tell you a really brief story. The longer story, if you capture the QR code or go to the link, I wrote a blog post about it, and so this is the link to the blog post, which will tell you a more expansive story. But I just want to briefly tell you, because I want to get to the meat of all of this presentation. So Donna, not her real name, was one of my students when I was teaching intensive English at the university. Before I started this semester, of course, I had my class list. And when I was mentioning my students' names to other teachers, her name came up often. And a lot of what was told about her was very negative. Things like, oh, be very careful of that student. She's not very nice. She doesn't come to class very often. She's a troublemaker. She tried to get a teacher fired. And so I thought to myself, oh my goodness, this poor student, she has quite a reputation. Oh, and she had already failed the course twice. It was the second level of the course. And in order to be able to go on to the next level, which was the undergraduate English, she had to pass the course, or on the third time, she would be let go from the university. So basically it depended on whether she could pass my course or not, whether she would stay at the university. However, I heard all of these things and I thought, well, you know, I'm just going to put that in the file cabinet and try to figure out what her problem is. And fast forward, I found out a lot about Donna throughout the semester. She didn't try to get me fired, but she did have problems, and they were stemming from problems she was having at home. She would come into class with full makeup on and false eyelashes and lipstick and very tight clothes, which is unusual for Kuwait, but especially unusual for the university. And so I would, you know, I would take her to the side, I would invite her to my office, I had many conversations with her, and it turned out that she had these home problems or personal problems. By the end of the semester, she did pass. She was very bright. And a couple of years later, I passed by her in the hallway. She was already a sophomore by then, and she was smiling, the first time I'd ever really seen her smile. And she was so happy to see me, and she told me that she was very successful in the courses that she had taken after my course. And I was really gratified that I had invested the time in getting to know her and trying to help her through her personal problems that were affecting her schoolwork. And again, if you want to read more about Donna, you could look at my blog post about her. So perceptions matter. What does that mean? Well, we often talk about the glass half empty or the glass half full, but I would like to say that the glass can be filled, and it actually can be filled and refilled and refilled. And when we're talking about language learners, we're talking about being able to take them from where they are and not having the idea that it's so hard for them and that we need to water down the curriculum for them because they're not understanding or they're not able to produce the language in order to be able to give us the answers. So when perceptions matter, it's not a matter of the glass half empty, that they lack abilities, or the glass half full where they're still trying to get there, but the fact that the glass can be filled and that they're willing, and if we give them the right tools and use the right words, and our perceptions are that we really want all of our students to learn. And I'm not saying that educators walk into the classroom and say, well, only some of our students can learn. No, I realize that all of us go into teaching because we want all of our students to learn. But lots of things come up that get in our way and get in our students' way. And sometimes it discourages us and frustrates our students. So with keeping that glass can be filled or refilled in mind, let's look at what is an asset-based approach. And some people are calling it strength-based approach. So according to this source, and this is the link for the source, in the simplest terms, an asset-based approach focuses on strengths. It views diversity in thought, culture, and traits as positive assets. And I want to emphasize this. I want to pause for a second here, because with our language learners, they are bringing their thoughts, their cultures, and their different traits to their learning. Something that we might forget when we're just concentrating on them learning the language. Teachers and students alike are valued for what they bring to the classroom rather than being characterized by what they may need to work on or lack. Okay, so it isn't this deficit mindset. It isn't what don't I know yet, or what don't you know yet, or what haven't you accomplished yet. Okay. One of the perceptions, or one of the ideas, and I'm not sure how much you use it in your context, but in the United States, in the West, there's often this at risk. Students are at risk, that they might not have the ability, they might not have the skills yet. Okay, and so we judge them to be at risk. Our English language learners are often, we judge them as at risk because they might not have enough of the skill of the language. Maybe their parents don't speak English. Maybe the only time, like for instance in Kuwait and perhaps in Egypt, the only time they speak in English is when they're in the classroom, because the rest of the time they're interacting in Arabic. And English and Arabic are just so different, so it becomes very difficult for them. So what they've started doing actually is talking about, instead of being at risk, that there are actually, that they're just not there yet, right? And so they have promise, they're at promise. So we would be able to actually look at them at having that promise to learn rather than being at risk of failure. Why is that so important? Because I, as a learner, internalize that language and it defines me. So if I get a failing grade, or I often fail, I mean, I had students who would come into me when I was director of the program at the university, and they would sit down in the chair and very sadly say to me, look, I've never learned English. I've tried learning English throughout my K-12 career. I'm bad at English. Just tell the teacher to pass me because I'm not going to learn this language. Meantime, all of their college courses were going to be in English. And I understood their problem. They had been told over and over and over again that they were not acquiring the language. And so that began to define them. So we need to be really careful about that. We certainly don't do it on purpose. We do it in a way that we want to help them. And I noticed in the chat someone said something about using psychology. Well, you know, belonging and psychology are kind of related, and feeling accepted and how we define ourselves have to do with psychology. So that's a really, really good perception on your part. So I'd love for you to share, because I don't want this to be all me talking. I'd love for you to share in the chat other words or phrases that you think might be viewed negatively by students. So what are some other words? So we talked about at risk, which, you know, you would think is something that we're trying to be helpful. We've designated students as at risk, whether they're language learners or they've suffered trauma, or they come from a poor family. But we're saying now that that begins to define a student. So when they're talking, you know, that self-talk that we have in our minds, it becomes very negative. So resubmit. Okay, I would love to know, I think it's Mirna, I would love to know what exactly about resubmit might be negative. Certainly the word fail, if I get a red F, that would, without any other explanation, that would definitely set me back or give me a negative self-image. But what about resubmit? And if that's negative, if I'm told to resubmit something like an assignment, how could we turn that around to something more positive? So what, and it doesn't have to be one word. It could be a phrase. It could be proofread and resubmit because it didn't pass. Afraid of making mistakes. Yes, and that negative self-talk ends up impeding on their confidence. And what you have is students coming into the classroom trying to learn the language or trying to learn, and they've already got this impression about themselves that they can't. They have zero self-efficacy or little self-efficacy in that subject or about themselves as a learner. Yes. So resubmitting, to proofread and resubmit. So I guess it's the words around it that we would use. How are we presenting that resubmission to the students? Is it something where they're learning from their mistakes, or is it something where it's graded and we've already told them that they failed at it? Or is it that we know they can do it, we've seen their work in class, whatever it is, and that we'd like them to go back? And how can we give them those scaffolds or supports in order to be able to do that? How can I help without doing the work for them? How can I help them? How can I question them? How can I do things to make it easier for them? Yes, repeating the work and losing marks, different mindsets, fixed versus growth mindset. Yes, Ali, that's very true. So we want them to have a growth mindset. But if they keep hearing repeatedly over and over again, fail, resubmit, mistakes, red marks, eventually that's all they're going to remember. And that's going to impose on how they're going to come into the classroom and want to learn or not. So the next thing I wanted to talk about very briefly is what is belonging and why is it important, because there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding about belonging. I'm going to tell you really quickly, the reason why I wrote my book was I started writing a blog about 2-3 years ago about my experiences acclimating or assimilating in Kuwait, and why I felt Kuwait is home to me just as much as the United States is home to me, which a lot of people found surprising, because many people travel and live in a place for a while, but they never feel like they belong. They never feel that it's home to them. And people were curious about how I was able to make it home for me. And so you can read on my website, my blogs, to find out more, so I don't want to take up time. But belonging became the thread that enabled me to feel at home here in Kuwait. And the more I researched about the belonging, the more I realized how much it affects our learners and ourselves in schools and in the classroom. So a sense of belonging is one of the most important activators of a child's engagement in learning. So if I feel a sense of safety when I'm in the classroom, I feel a sense of belonging, that I am part of this community, this English language learner community, and I belong here because I can succeed, then I am more apt to be engaged in the learning, which means I'm more apt to achieve. And so how do we look at creating a classroom community? And I know we all do this in different ways. The classroom as a community becomes a place where you can bring your emotions, your fears, your needs, and that there will be acceptance and a sense of belonging. And acceptance means acceptance for me, for who I am, what I represent, everything about me. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in your classroom. And Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond is a major educational researcher at one of the universities in California. I believe it's Berkeley. She does a lot of research. So I'd love for you again to share in the chat something that you do, maybe an activity or lesson or daily practice, to create that sense of community and belonging in your classroom. What are some of the things that you do already? And then I'm going to go through some of the things that you can do that you may not know about. Let's see. So let me go back. See if we can go back, because I went too far forward. Just a second. Okay, I'm going back a couple of slides. Okay, so here we go. And then I'll go back to the chat and see what you're doing in the chat. Okay, slideshow. Sorry about that. So Marina says, if I have a student who does sports, I ask them about what they do. Yes, so finding out learner interests is really important. Excellent. Or if someone has a particular talent, I give them a chance to talk about it. Yes. Yes, getting to know your learners is really, really important. And as soon as you start the semester, as soon as you start the school year, but of course, you know, sometimes we're doing different activities. We can do that along the year. It might come up in something that they've written about. Also, for our English language learners, when they're writing or speaking about or learning about things that are their passions or talents or interests, they're more likely to be engaged. Anything else? Any other practices? Okay, so I'll go on. All right, so planting seeds for success, teacher. So what is my role as a teacher in order to plant those seeds for success for our students and help with that sense of belonging? How do I do that? Myrna is saying that we might have a class garden, some other kind of interest, something that you could talk about that's outside of the classroom to get it back into nature. It's very relaxing. So, seeds for success for the teacher. All students can learn. Of course, like I said at the beginning, we know our students can learn, but sometimes things come up and it frustrates us and we're not sure if we're doing our best for our students. So getting to know the learner profile, which is what Myrna's suggestions were, that she gets to know their talents, their strengths, their interests, takes them outside perhaps if you have that space to do that. Not every school or classroom is able to do that. Look at what their strengths, I like to call them superpowers, are. And I want to tell you that students often don't realize they have those superpowers. Sometimes we don't, as adults, realize until someone points it out to us. So it's very important when you notice a strength in a student to call it out, to remark about it, to pay attention to it, to let the student know that you've noticed it, because they might not have noticed it in themselves. Sometimes it's related to something that they cannot do, and they look at it as a negative or a deficit rather than as a strength. So we want to be sure that our students know what their strengths are, because those strengths will help them pull through the things that are difficult for them. And again, that words matter. Words need to be positive and constructive. So if we're talking about resubmitting an assignment, when we're giving feedback, the feedback needs to be focused, specific, and we need to tell them exactly what it is that they need to do in order to improve their work, whether it's an essay or a spoken assignment or an exercise in their book. And it should be constructive. So we need to look at it as a way for the students to be able to build their own skill and independence at being able to move forward. One of the things that I used often, especially with English language learners, because of their lack of confidence, is questioning techniques. So I would go to a student, ask a question, and if I know I had taught that information and was pretty sure the student knew it, but was worried about making a mistake and answering incorrectly, I would continue elaborating on the question or asking the question in a different way. And wait time is really important. Waiting enough time to be sure. And usually the student would answer. At a certain point, if I felt the student was getting frustrated because they really didn't know the answer, that's when I'd ask them, would you like someone else to help you, or would you like me to ask someone else? It gives a different message than, I've asked you the question, you can't answer it, or you answered it incorrectly, now I'm moving on to the next person. So it's this dialogue that we have with our students. Again, representing how they think about themselves in those situations. The next time, the student is more prone or more likely to answer the question, even if they might get it wrong, because they know that there's support for it. That I'm not going to just immediately go on to the next person and assume that they don't know the answer. Ali, yes, ICQs are really important, yes. And that I call it tiered questioning, but there are different versions of that. So I'm making sure that they feel they know that they can ask, have that question answered, and then I'm going to wait for them to answer it. I will tell you a really quick story. At the end of one of the semesters when I was teaching, I had a student come to me, and she was working on her final essay, and she looked up at me and she said, Miss Ilene, I just want to tell you something, but I hope you won't get upset at me. And I said, no, Mona, just let me know. And she said, well, my friend and I, they used to sit together in class. We used to get really upset at you when you would keep asking us questions when we would want to know the answer. You know, we just wanted you to answer it. We didn't want you to keep asking us questions. But she said, now I know why you're doing it. Because she realized that the learning they had inside, but they just didn't have the confidence to be able to share it. So in the chat, what's one way or some ways you're planting seeds for student achievement or success? What are the kinds of things you're doing already in your classroom that help your students succeed? So take a minute and think of those things that you're doing in your classroom that are helping your students, that sort of have been your students' aha moments. You've seen that light go on when you're doing it. What are some of the techniques that you're using? Ali mentioned ICQs or ICQS. What else? I'm sure you're doing a lot of different things. Peer teaching. Yes, peer teaching. Teaching other classmates. Very important. Esma says, I try to put them at ease and make them comfortable enough to produce the language. Yes. Yes, without worrying about making mistakes. Yes, so you set that tone for safety. You set that tone. How do you do that, Esma? It would be really great if you could share that. If you don't want to do it in a chat, it takes too long or whatever, at the end, hopefully we'll have some time and maybe you can actually either come on camera or unmute yourself and be able to share it with us. So yes, peer teaching, having them work in groups, collaborate, communicating, making the communication something that's not being tested, something that's not for the teacher, for the book. Great answers. So, how do we ensure a sense of belonging for the student So self-belonging. I have grouped all of the self words as self-belonging. There are others that use this term, but very few. Self-belonging is self-efficacy, self-esteem, self-confidence, self-worth, your whole self-concept, right? And that needs to be really high or really strong in order for you to have that self-efficacy. And that self-efficacy in the target language is really, really important. I feel that I'm capable of learning. So it's having that confidence to say, or that growth mindset, as Ali mentioned, to say, yes, I can do this. I don't say no when I give them feedback. Excellent. Changing the patterns of interaction. Yes, Ali, very important. Keep a smile on my face when they answer. Yes. You know, I don't have this in my presentation, but in the book I mention about Polyvagal Theory, that autonomic nervous system that we have that generates responses from how people are looking at us, how the tone of voice, how we hear them, the way their eyes are. So yes, keeping a smile on your face and not indicating that that their answer is wrong to the point where they believe, they internalize that it's a bad thing. Yes, so interesting, keeping a smile on your face. I like that. I give them some thinking time before they answer. Very important. Yes, extremely important. It's not just the wait time, but it's the thinking time. And why is that? Because many of them are still translating or trying to comprehend what we're asking, which is why it's so important to reinterpret the questions, because maybe they didn't understand it the way that I asked it initially. And giving them time to think about the answer before I actually call on somebody, depending on what level of English they're at, is really important. So excellent, excellent. So that self-efficacy and the fact that I feel seen and heard, so that culturally responsive teaching, that I understand that depending on your context, for instance, in Kuwait, where we don't have a variety of backgrounds, the majority of our students are Kuwaiti, but we do have other students learning English who are from other Arab countries and other places. And so we do need to understand that they bring a different culture. They bring different attitudes. They bring different accents and things to the language and understandings of certain words. Care about them and show respect. Yes, extremely important. And that respect works both ways. Avoid nomination. If I know most of them don't know the answer, I encourage them to take the initiative and try. Excellent. Yes. Building up that sense of self-efficacy and confidence, but by saying, you know, it's okay if you're not sure. Doesn't matter. Share what you think it is, right? It's the way we use those words. Excellent. So see, a lot of you are doing it already, but you didn't know what it was. Sometimes it just helps for us to know what to call it, although there are a lot of buzzwords in education, so we don't want to give it a buzzword. But if we know that it's strength-based or asset-based, it's the thing that we're pointing for, we can be more mindful about it as teachers and really encourage it in our students. Yes, you're not there yet. It's progress, yes. And for them to be able to notice their progress, right, by using their strengths. We talked already about each student has strengths, and the fact that the student is able to say, I have superpowers, I have strengths, and that words matter. I talk positively to myself. So I'm not saying to myself anymore, I lack confidence, I can't do this, I'll never learn English, I'm not good in speaking, I'm not good in writing, I don't know how to proofread. I'm just not there yet. And so this creates a different sense of how I speak to myself, which increases their self-efficacy and growth mindset. So the best part of this presentation, well, all of that was really important, and I appreciate all of the sharing from everybody in the chat box. How do we build our toolbox of strategies? What kind of things do we need to look for that we might not have already, or that we have, but we're just not sure how to use it yet? Again, our own growth mindset as learners, right? So learning strategies or adding on strategies to pre-assess skills and knowledge. I'm sure you already have some, but we'll look at some more. Content and resources are culturally responsive. A lot of times our textbooks are from the West, are from America or Britain or Europe. And oftentimes the context is difficult for our students to understand or relate to. We were lucky when I was director of the program at the university. One of the publishers came out with a set of Middle Eastern or Gulf region textbooks. And so the content and the topics and the themes were all relatable to our students, which was wonderful. But often we don't have that. So it's really important for us to pull in other resources where students realize that their culture and language is important, as well as the target language, as well as the language they're learning. And often I had to speak to instructors who would say, my classroom is English only. I understand that. And I would tell my students, obviously they would eventually find out that I was fluent in Arabic. But we didn't speak in Arabic in the classroom. And I encouraged them that the time that they had in my classroom was really the major time that they would have to use the target language. But I respected the fact that sometimes they needed to rely on their mother language in order to be able to understand quicker and better, because those two languages go together. How the brain learns is they begin to eventually, how do you become fluent? Eventually they're all on the same synapse, right? So we need to use them, but not as a crutch. For us, PD resources, we could look up books and articles about asset-based or strength-based teaching. Webinars, there are webinars out there. And professional learning. Hopefully you have in school your professional learning community. This teacher training group is a wonderful professional learning community, and I applaud them for that. Online, if you're not online already on social media, or you don't use it for your professional learning, I highly suggest that you cultivate part of your PLN on either Twitter, Instagram, or any other social media that you use to be able to have that interaction with other educators around the globe. I have learned so much from everybody that I interact with. Sometimes we have to look outside of our own group to learn a little bit more. So here are some of the tools. Pre-assessment strategies for content, okay? So we could do anticipation journals, predict. What are those kinds of things that we're going to use? KWL charts. What do we know? What do we want to know? And then once we're finished, what did we learn? So different graphic organizers like concept maps. What's in the middle there? We could use a web, something visual. Some of our learners need to have that visual, and especially our language learners. Running records, things that we can keep for ourselves or things that students can keep. And you can see there are entrance or exit cards. So an entrance card, what do you hope to learn today? An exit card, what was the biggest takeaway? What was your aha moment from what you learned today? And then I would take them home, and or I would look at them after class, and I would say, oh, okay, these are things that resonated with the students, or these are things that the students still have questions about. As I mentioned, prediction, doing self-evaluations, but making sure that they're guided. You might have a list of questions or a worksheet that you have them work through. Student products and work samples. So giving them the chance to be able to work on drafts before they get to that final assignment, and then giving them feedback, specific feedback about a specific grammar point or a specific literary element that they are not using properly or they aren't using in their writing. So these are some of the pre-assessment strategies for content. And how about pre-assessment strategies so we can get to know our students for that social and emotional learning, that SEL? So self-evaluations, not necessarily in the content, but about how they feel about learning English or how they feel about the subject that you're teaching. What is that? You know, how do I feel about it? I know a math teacher in Canada who used this every year with her students. And there were so many things that the students would say that they had impressions about themselves. And it enabled the teacher to be able to know how better to scaffold and support their learning and take them away from that negative self-talk to more positive self-talk. Again, running records, anecdotal notes, and running records are just sort of those quick notes and aren't necessarily regularly written, but anecdotal notes are things that happen afterwards so that we remember them, things that maybe a student said or did or didn't do, and we want to remember that so that we can go back and help them in the future. Students draw about how they feel. Maybe they don't want to write. Instead of a self-evaluation just being about writing, maybe they feel weak in their writing or they're not comfortable writing about it. Maybe they'd like to draw it or create some kind of graphic for it. And then daily check-ins. So standing at the door, greeting them at the door, and then finding out how they are. Are they doing okay? Kind of, not so good. And there are different ways to do that. So how many of those strategies I mentioned do you use? And you don't have to give a number, but can you think of others? What kinds of things did I not list that you are using? How many of those strategies, or what other strategies do you use that I didn't mention? And share them in the chat. Oh, thank you, Marina. Oh, thank you. And you'll find them when I share with you the Wakelet collection. You'll find them in the Wakelet collection, which I'll share in just a minute or so. Anything else? So it means I didn't leave anything for you to share. Okay, well, if you think of anything, feel free to share it even after. Okay. All right. So here's your start to build your toolbox of strategies. So I want to show you the collection. Take a screenshot if you want to. Oh, no, I mean, they're all, oh, you're very welcome. And I'm glad they're helpful, Mirna. I'm really glad they're helpful. And thank you so much for your interaction, you and Esma and Ali. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to just go off the screen for a minute to show you the Wakelet collection and what it is. And then I'll come back to it so that you can, let me see. I just want to see. Well, let me see if I can. I have to make this smaller. Okay. Just a second. Why isn't this working? Okay. Send us a link. Okay, sure. Yes, I can send you the link. I'm going to show it to you now, and then I'm going to send you the link. So let me get out of this. I'm going to stop the share for just a second and escape from this. And I want to show you the collection. And let me share again. Let's see. And okay. So when you go into the Wakelet collection, this is what you're going to see. Asset-based approach to teaching. And I regularly add to my collections. So check back every once in a while to see if I've added anything. So practical strategies for culturally relevant lessons. These are some new things. Creating a culture of belonging. How to choose children books. And then what is asset-based teaching? And then some recordings. Okay, so here is a podcast that a very good friend of mine did. I don't know if you're aware of Dr. Carol Salva, but she is an ESL expert and offers a lot of information and techniques and strategies So if you are on social media, definitely look her up, Dr. Carol Salva. I have a podcast that I did, and there's a webinar that I did, and all of these kind of resources. This is a really interesting resource that a friend of mine put together for encouraging confidence and sharing by your students. It's called WOW, a check-in, and she does WOW, POW, NOW, and it's really interesting, and it's interactive, and you don't have to do anything with it. You can share it right away because you have editor rights for it. Okay. And let me share the link to the Wakelet collection. I'll share it in. And if you haven't used Wakelet before, I definitely want to encourage you to use it. It's a great way to curate. It's a great way to share with your students. And there's the link if you want to use the link if you weren't able to get the link. So there's the link to the Wakelet collection. So lots of resources, and as I said, I'm always adding to it. You will find articles and information from all kinds of things, and a little bit more about what is the asset-based approach, because I can only share so much in the time that I have. Okay, so here are some reflection questions. You can put them in the chat, or we want time for Q&A. And so if you want to share your thoughts by unmuting yourself, you're welcome to. So things I like to think about is, how can I spark their interest? How can I create that safe space? So how can I make sure the fact that not only do they respect me, they respect themselves, but they respect each other. So when students make mistakes, to make sure that their peers don't giggle or say something that might make them feel like they don't want to share anymore. How do we catch them when they falter, when they're not failing, but when they're sort of stumbling? And how do we ensure their self-talk is positive? How do we watch and be mindful of the words and phrases that we use so that they're able to have that positive self-talk? Mirna, that's okay. You're welcome to put your thoughts, if you want, into the chat box. If not, that's okay also. And so just so you can see how to get in touch with me, as was put in the beginning, this is my current website. I'm working on making a new website, so it may be current for another couple of weeks, and then I'll have a new website. But you'll find all kinds of Wakelet collections about belonging, and my blog and my podcast. My podcast is called Journeys to Belonging, and it's available on most of the podcast platforms, and Twitter and Instagram, and you can find me on Facebook and LinkedIn. I'm at Ilene Winokur. I'd love to interact with you and get to know you better and your work better. And so I'm going to stop sharing and find out if anyone has any input or any questions, things that you would like to know more about, that I didn't talk enough about. And you can either put it in the chat, or you can, as I said, if your mic is working, or if you'd like to ask the question, you can go ahead and do that. And remind yourself that whatever you're doing now, think about the things that you're already doing, I guess is what I want to say. That is asset-based. And think about the things that you need to change or you would like to change, because without realizing it, you were actually using a deficit-based mindset toward your students. Again, not doing it on purpose, All of those words that we use, we don't do that on purpose. But now that you're aware of it, what kinds of things are you thinking about that you might change as a result? And what are the things, because often, we teach every day and we learn different strategies all the time, but we don't necessarily know how those strategies work in particular ways. So think about the strategies that you're using, like some of you shared today, that are helpful towards engaging your students or having them involved in the learning and giving themselves this positive sense of